What is up, everybody? It's the Georgia Show in the AM. I am Jake Rowe, and listen, I'm not going to be by myself this whole show. Just starting it as Palmer is writing a little bit of breaking news. The Georgia-Clemson game time has been set for noon on ABC to start the college football season. When Palmer gets on, we'll discuss that. We will also discuss on three, Jesse Simonton has put out 2 more position rankings. Since the last time we discussed, he's ranked the Georgia offensive line and the defensive line. We're going to dig into that. And then the Diamond Dogs. What about those guys, man? All the way up into the top 10, depending on who you look at. All the way up as high as number 6 and consensus in the top 10. But listen, before we get to any of that, let me talk about a guy that we appreciate over here at DawgsHQ, and that is our man, Andy Ludicky over at My Perfect Franchise. Are you a displaced corporate executive or wanting to put your career in your own hands? Or could you also be an experienced entrepreneur and you want to do something different? You want to diversify? Well, Andy Ludicky and MyPerfectFranchise.net can help you out. Andy's a huge college football fan, huge college sports fan in general. He's a franchise veteran, and having owned multiple franchises and businesses, he uses his expertise and he helps others find their American dream through a very thorough consultation and evaluation process. Call Andy, put your life and career in your own hands, and best of all, it's not going to cost you a dime. His services are 100% free to use, so what do you have to lose? Find your perfect franchise at MyPerfectFranchise.net, and that's our dude, Andy Ludicky, over at My Perfect Franchise. Welcome to the Georgia Show. Like I said earlier, I'm Jake Rowe, and I'm not by myself because our man Palmer Thomas is going to be with us here in just a second. Georgia-Clemson, noon game. Kind of weird, I would say. Wasn't really expecting that one. And here's Palmer, who had just got through writing about that for us. And we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here. We'll get to it in just a second. But I understand where ESPN is coming from on this, ESPN, ABC. First college football weekend of the year. You've had, I believe, Fox and the Big 12 and the Big 10 kind of dominating that time slot here for a little while. Georgia's got a chance to really get into it. Georgia's got a chance. I'm not Georgia, but the SEC's really got a chance to get into that time slot with this 12. Palmer, you seem to be a little bit of a fan of this. Why? Why are you a big fan of the noon kick? Because not many Georgia fans are.
Well, I mean, it gets us home earlier.
Yeah.
That
also has us leaving the house earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I can get up and go. It's the first Saturday of college football, Jake. We can get up and go.
That's right.
We can get excited. No, I'm excited about a noon kick. I mean, I think it allows us to, really kind of take in that, the two of us allows us to, more enjoy the big first weekend of college football. I don't think it's as big this year as it has been some past years. I know I saw that ESPN announced that they were going to Texas A&M Notre Dame as their opener for College Game Day, which I think I think that's an exciting game. I definitely know that. What is this the year that we've got LSU and USC on Sunday? That should be an exciting game out there in Las Vegas. It just, to me, and Jake, you made this point to us, in our DawgsHQ thread. I think that it allows ESPN and ABC to kick off their first college football Saturday with a very big marquee matchup and carry that viewership all day. And I think that for fans, that's something that, look, you were going to be watching the Georgia game anyway. Now you're watching the Georgia game, and you can carry that into watching other football games as well.
Yeah, and another thing it really does, and this is the reason why I never thought that it was set in stone that Georgia and Clemson would be that night game is, Palmer, I don't know if you took any telecommunications classes at Georgia. I took a couple. One of the things that those guys love to talk about is from a TV standpoint, you like to kind of get the early slot. So I believe it's one of the reasons Friends came on at 8 p.m., like the very first 30-minute time slot on Thursday nights, was because you get that kind of big timer in there as early as you can so that you can carry that viewership for the rest of the day. People tend to leave the TV on the same channel. And after that game, I believe the Notre Dame Texas A&M game, is that right? Is that the night game or is that the 3:30 game, Palmer?
I did not catch the announcement of all the game times. I just got the Georgia.
Yeah, there was a
one.
graphic they put up, and I'm looking for it right now as well. This is phenomenal podcast, and actually, Florida Miami is going to be on 3:30 ABC. So that Georgia game carries you into that one, and then you've got Notre Dame Texas A&M at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Which, that Georgia or that Florida Miami game, that's a game, again, a lot of Georgia fans were going to be watching because it's, a fan base and a team that Georgia crosses paths with there.
Sure. Yeah. And they'll want to do some scouting, they'll want to go ahead and get a look at those Gators for this time of the year. I mean, I wonder, is DJ Lagway going to be playing a lot of quarterback there? I know Graham Mertz is back. What's Florida going to look like? Eugene Wilson and kind of those weapons they've got on the offensive side of the ball. So that'll be fun to watch too. And listen, I've always had this, from a personal perspective, if you ever wonder what it's like to be a sports writer, you always prefer, for me, has always been I prefer a noon game or I prefer a night game, because otherwise Saturday is for work and that is it. Because you get there 3.5 hours before the game, you leave 2.5, 3 hours after the game. And you kind of miss a lot of stuff. You don't really get a chance to watch very much ball. Maybe you get a little bit of the morning, but otherwise it really eats up a big chunk of the day when you got a mid-afternoon game. And listen, I know a lot of times the noon kickoff kind of gets the stigma that, all right, well, maybe my team's not going to be up for it. Listen, if Georgia can't get up for Clemson at noon, the first college football Saturday of the year, then Georgia's going to have bigger problems than a noon kickoff to start the season. That's for sure. But ultimately, not a home game. I don't have to worry about a dead crowd or anything like that. I think everybody's going to be pretty fired up. The people I do feel bad for, though, is those that kind of get the parking passes there around Mercedes-Benz Stadium and have a chance to tailgate. There's not going to be a ton of tailgating time, but hey, man, get your satellite ready, get your stuff fired up, or your streaming service set up, and catch it all after the game. Tailgate for a few hours, let that traffic clear out.
We'll join you out there.
Yeah, we'll join you out there. We're taking invites. My email is jakemrow@gmail.com. Hit me up. I'd love to come to your tailgate, especially if you got some really good grub. We'll swing by and hang out with you guys. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Fred's Meat and Bread over at Krog Street Market and go to the home. I may do both anyway. But also a big fan, Palmer, of getting off of Jimmy Carter Boulevard, headed down I-85 and swinging over to Papa Do's, calling in a pasta Mardi Gras and swinging by and grabbing one of those on the way home too. That's a Jake Reeves special. I don't think we've ever done that one before.
Didn't you say that's a fan favorite in your household there? That it's
was it Papa Do's or pasta Mardi Gras?
Papa Do's.
Yeah, Papa Do's. Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Papa Do's is man, listen, it's a chain, but that's good grub, man. That's good grub. Let's not turn this into a Bark After Dark episode. Hey, by the way, did you tune into Bark After Dark last night?
Did not. Didn't have a chance to catch it. Plan to make it a appointment viewing after at some point today. I'm
interested to get that text after you watch it, just to see what you got to say about our future plans, about some stuff we've got going on. Maybe we're gonna ambush Palmer Toms at some point. maybe a little Palmer Toms ambush. All right, let's move on. Jesse Simonson. By the way, I just want to take this time. If you are not a member over at DawgsHQ, please become a member. We would love to have you. But if you're not reading On 3, I'm a big fan of Jesse Simonson as a national writer. I think he puts a lot of thought and a lot of effort into doing what he does, and I think he does a really good job of putting his opinion out there in such a way that it's not like an absolute don't bicker with my opinion type thing. He's very talented at that, and I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Jesse Simonson and the work he does. So he's put out 2 more position unit rankings, Palmer, and they rank the same, I believe. Offensive line, number 3. Defensive line, number 3. So here Georgia is. We talk about it being the trench warfare game in college football, And Georgia is right there among the top 3 teams in the country, offensive line and defensive line. And out of, fear of going too long here, I'll go ahead and throw the other ones out there. Quarterback was number 4. Running back was number 2 nationally. Tight end stuck at number 1 without Brock Bowers. Just amazing what Georgia's done in that room. And wide receiver is at number 6. And I think, if we look back on that one at the end of the year, Georgia has a chance to creep up a couple, 2 or 3 spots just because of the depth in that room. Palmer, let's start on the offensive line. I'm just going to ask you straight up, agree or disagree? Number 3 offensive line in the country.
My gut says disagree. And that's not just because I like to disagree with everything. My gut says my gut says that Georgia has the best offensive line in the country.
Yeah, I think that case can be made as well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the consistency that they've had over the last few seasons, combined with the experience that they have returning from those last few seasons. Last season in particular, obviously, you didn't want to see Amarius Mims go down, but in doing so, they were able to get a lot more experience for Dylan Fairchild and Micah Morris there at guard, with Xavier Truss bumping out to tackle. You get a feel for what this group may look like without Mims this year. Replacing Cedric Van Pran is not going to be easy. Never would have been, but the fact that they're doing it with Jared Wilson and somebody that has gotten so much praise, I think that is something that you can feel pretty confident in. So I see the question in the comments. LSU is number 1. Texas is number 2. I can understand the LSU one. They've got a pair of tackles that might go in the top 10 that have been starting since they were freshmen. But I think Georgia's, as good, if not better, than everybody in the country.
The one thing that makes me more agreeable to number 3, Palmer, is I feel like the last couple of years, especially, we've come into the year with Georgia, maybe not quite as deep as they are right now, but I felt like with Broderick Jones, you had a cornerstone, surefire first-round draft pick at left tackle. And you had Amarius Mims, a cornerstone, surefire first-round draft pick at right tackle. I don't know that about Georgia's current tackles. If it's Xavier Truss, I think Monroe Freeling has a great shot of being that one day. But Xavier Truss right now is a 6th-year player. We've heard great things about the spring he had. I thought he looked really good in the G-Day game. Ernest Green is the guy, Pro Football Focus puts him up as a top 10 names to know for the 2025 NFL draft. And he's a guy I'm really, if you really think about it, and I know I'm kind of spinning a little bit in circles here, but something I feel like I need to make here. If you really think about what he did last year, it's pretty stinking impressive. This guy, yeah. Ernest Green got the spring, right? But he didn't practice all fall. He didn't play all fall. And then he wins the starting job. And I would say first 3 or 4 games last year was 100% Georgia's weakest link on the offensive line. 100%, like struggled. But you made the point that you saw some flashes there with his ability to pop out of his stance and get out there in space. Big time athlete. But I thought he just really struggled to start last season. And who could expect anything different? He was basically a true freshman playing left tackle. But he got better, a lot better as the year went on. So while I think the potential is there for him, I'm not sitting here knowing that if he were to enter the draft after his redshirt sophomore year, he's going to be a first-round draft pick, when we absolutely knew those two things going into the 2022 and 2023 season. And not only that, but going into the 2021 season, Jamari Sawyer, we didn't know he was going to be a first-round pick, and he wasn't. He ended up being a 7th-round pick, but he's an NFL starter. But but he was super proven. Like he had played that position at such a high level the year before. But the thing I do love about this Georgia offensive line is if you break it down, you've got 3 tackles that you trust can play winning football, and you've got 4 guards. There's a crossover there, and that's Xavier Truss. 5,109 returning snaps on the offensive line. And listen, it's going to be really hard for the man in the middle, for the one non-returning starter, for the one spot that's kind of, experiencing some true, changeover here. But man, Jared Wilson, I'm not 100% certain that when you start talking about from snap to whistle, that he's not going to be better than Cedric Van Pran. I think that his ability to do the job, during the play is going to be big time. It's just a matter of can he provide the leadership and the pre-snap direction of Cedric Van Pran. But I see exactly where you're coming from. But and I do agree with that. I think I would probably, could make the argument that Georgia should be number one. But the fact that there's just not that number one surefire first round talent anywhere on the offensive line, really.
Yeah.
Well, I think guys are going to play on Sundays.
And I think that, again, you go back to LSU and they've got two potential top 10 picks at offensive
Will Campbell's getting a lot of love, man. He is getting a lot of love and deserved.
And Emory Jones too. I mean, not the Florida quarterback Emory Jones, LSU offensive tackle Emory Jones. Look, I mean, those two guys absolutely, and that's probably what gives the edge to LSU. I don't know a ton about Texas. I mean, I know that they've got Kelvin Banks at tackle there, who's one of the best in the country, and was one of the best in the country coming out of high school. So, you're probably right there. You make a good point with the offensive tackle, but I want to go back to something you said. So you said you feel good about 3 offensive tackles, correct? In Truss and Green and Freeling. Do you not feel good about Micah Morris there? Because I might throw him in there as well.
Yeah, I just don't know. We haven't seen very many, like real-time game reps from him at tackle. I had a chance to spend some time with Micah here recently at the Camden County Bulldog Club, and he told me, he was like, hey, it was a little bit of an adjustment to start, but Micah Morris is one of those guys, man. I think he can do anything, and I'm going to be really surprised if he doesn't end up starting close to half of Georgia's games at left guard this year, because Micah, I don't know if a lot of folks know this. Micah has graduated from the University of Georgia, but he doesn't turn 21 until August. He is pound for pound the strongest football player on Georgia's roster. I mean, he is just raw power. We've heard him talk. That whole hey, listen, if I'm coming after you in space, you better have your chin strap on because coming with bad intentions. All those things really make you like him a lot. And the funny thing is like you go down the board, Ernest Green, again, pointing to kind of what you pointed out to me, was watch him get out there and block in space, do his thing. He's impressive. You Dylan Fairchild, just raw power, strength, technique, body control, just a big time football player. Micah Morris, we've talked about him. Jared Wilson, right? Freak show athlete. Everybody's talked about that. Tate Ratledge, 1 million snaps under his belt. And if you go back and watch Georgia against Kentucky this past year, Deion Walker is getting a lot of love as a potential first-round pick. Tate Ratledge put hands on him on the first play of scrimmage, Georgia's first run play from scrimmage against Kentucky, and then took him about 7 yards downfield. And that's one of the biggest men in college football. Xavier Truss is a little bit of the whipping boy at Georgia, and I'll concede, like in a lot of instances, he's played winning football, but he's probably been the weakest link on the offensive line. But the most important thing is that first part. He's played a lot of winning football, over 1,500 snaps of really good, solid football for Georgia. Monroe Freeling is a next level talent. Oh, and by the way, something we reported about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Jamal Merriweather, second-year player out of Brunswick, love him. They're big on him. So Daniel Calhoun is another. I mean, Stacey Searles has done a really good job building that offensive line room and building some depth. So I like the whole group, but I'm not ready to put Micah Morris into that kind of tackle thing, even though I do think it's going to come down to him or Jamal Merriweather in terms of who's the fourth guy at tackle. But I guess it's all going to depend on what kind of shape Georgia is on the interior. But I just really love
how much Micah is playing on the interior. I mean, if we're talking about this is a situation where Micah Morris may not be one of the first five, but he's going to be viewed as a starting five member, by Kirby. I think, that you probably will see more of Jamal Merriweather with that second team offensive line than you might Micah Morris at tackle.
And this might be pie in the sky to think about this, Palmer, but let's say Ernest Green comes back for 2025 and Xavier Truss has no choice. He's got to go. Tate Ratledge, I think, could come back if he really wanted to. Probably won't. Okay. So let's say Georgia gets Ernest Green, Dylan Fairchild, or let's say it gets Ernest Green and Jared Wilson back. Okay. It gets one of Dylan Fairchild or Micah Morris back. You're looking at a situation at tackle.
Monroe Freeling is back because I would say Monroe Freeling is back.
Got to be back, right?
He's a sophomore.
So you're probably looking at a situation there where you've got, and looking all the way ahead to 2025, Ernest Green and Monroe Freeling at tackle. You probably see Jamal Merriweather start to rotate in there and become this year's Monroe Freeling. So you're setting yourself up for more carryover the following season. And then you probably have a situation at guard where Daniel Calhoun moves into the rotation there at guard. And Georgia
with either Micah Morris or Dylan Fairchild.
Yeah, with Micah Morris and Dylan Fairchild, or maybe one of those guys has to step in to start. And you're just starting this thing all over again where Georgia's building depth through playing time the previous year. It's something that started, I guess, right there with Amarius Mims. Really started with Broderick Jones in a sense with that last year under Matt Luke. And there wasn't a rotation there, but injuries allowed Broderick Jones to kind of get his feet wet. It's just a really incredible situation.
And just putting, the plug at halftime of the national championship game to say, hey, we're going to roll with Broderick and move Warren Erickson out and bring Jamari into guard. And that's really what kind of sparked some of that.
No doubt, 100%. And that may have been kind of the catalyst for the way things have been. But since Stacey Searles has taken over, you've ended up with a tackle rotation just about every year. And Georgia would have had a much more extensive tackle rotation last year if Austin Blasky had been able to stay healthy. And now he's going to be the starting center at North Carolina, this coming season.
Is he starting at center?
He is going to be the starting center. Where they're all throughout spring practice and has done quite well. I've kind of been keeping up with that one. All right, let's look to the defensive side of the ball where Georgia's defensive line ranks number 3. Agree or disagree, Palmer?
Yeah, that's one I probably will agree on. I publicly have not been as high on Georgia's defensive line.
And by the way, let me say this: it's defensive line edge. Like they just put them together, which I think is cool. It's the defensive front. Let's put them all together.
Yeah, and you see so much crossover. I mean, Michael Williams is the perfect example. Is he, an outside linebacker edge? Is he a, hand in the dirt defensive end? Gabe Harris, all Damon Wilson, all those kind of guys. I think that it's best to pair those two together. I'm not going to push back too much on this. In all honesty, I might be a little bit surprised that they are that high. I know defensive line, you look around the country and what teams needed in the transfer portal, it was interior defensive line. Georgia has interior defensive linemen. Now, are they the best interior defensive linemen in the country? I don't know that I would say Warren Brinson or Nazir Stackhouse is the best interior defensive lineman in the country. Georgia definitely could have improved there. But you feel good about their experience. I mean, it goes back to what you were just saying about Xavier Truss of, hey, maybe he's the whipping boy, but, he's got a lot of experience. Those two on the interior of the Georgia defensive front, they've got a lot of experience. And so I am not incredibly high on this defensive line. I think that you feel good about it. You don't feel great about it. And maybe that is just me being a little bit, having a distorted view because we watched, not all too long ago, that 2021 defensive line and that 2022 defensive line that had Jalen Carter, and Jordan Davis and Trayvon Walker and Devontae Wyatt. And we're probably never going to see anything like that ever again. And so, maybe my expectations need to be lowered a little bit, and realize that Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse is a pretty dang good defensive line, and especially when, like we said, this you pair it with the edge guys, Mykel Williams, Damon Wilson, Gabe Harris, Chaz Chambliss, a lot of guys that got a lot of experience there. You add in Jordan Hall and Kristen Miller in the middle, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. You've got a lot of guys that you feel have played a good bit of football, and a lot of guys that you should feel pretty good about with the talent that they've got.
Yeah, I mean, so I am pretty high on this Georgia defensive line. I have very high expectations for it for several reasons. Number one is Ernest Green. We talked about him on the offensive line. I feel like Kristen Miller and Jordan Hall are a couple of Ernest Greens on the defensive line last year. They hadn't played any football. They were kind of thrown into the fray, and we saw flashes out of both of them, especially Kristen Miller. I look back on that play he made against Alabama on Alabama's first scoring drive that kind of stopped that drive. He had a tackle for loss in the run game. I thought that was the kind of play, and I'm not saying he's this guy. He's not this guy. I don't know that Georgia will ever have another defensive lineman this guy, but that was the kind of play Jalen Carter made for you. And I think Warren Brinson has done some of the same things, especially as a pass rush. So I always said that even when Rusty and I and you and I were on here and we were talking about, hey, we expect Georgia to be in the transfer portal for defensive linemen, I thought that Georgia's main avenue of improvement was for those guys to get a year older and a year better. And Trey Scott's
absolutely,
yeah,
and absolutely agree there, because I mean we're talking about a former 5-star Jordan Hall, and somebody in Kristen Miller that was highly pursued, and would have been highly pursued if he had gone into the transfer portal.
Yeah, and then Warren Brinson, my deal with him is just health, and obviously you can't predict health, but if you look back at the 2022 season, the 2023 season, when he was fully healthy, he made plays. And I think that he's a guy, Georgia fans will remember this. They had a defensive lineman back in the day. He played some end, but he played a lot of defensive tackle. Josh Millard ended up playing in the NFL at a Benedictine high school. He was a guy that, man, he just always seemed to show up and make plays. Warren Brinson kind of reminds me of that. And it's funny that they're both kind of from the Savannah area. So he really reminds me of that. Nas Stackhouse is the one to me that gut feeling. I haven't heard this, I haven't seen this, but gut feeling is that we've seen him in 2022. He played more snaps than any other Georgia interior defensive lineman in 2022. And he was an absolute stud, was phenomenal. This past year, he struggled some. And I think, honestly, that had a little bit to do with the fact that in 14 games, really 13 and a half, if you count the second half of the Orange Bowl, he played fewer snaps than Jordan Davis did when Jordan Davis played 15 games in 2021. There was a lot on his plate. Georgia didn't really have anything to kind of supplement him with. I think that if Jamal Jarrett or Xavier McLeod or somebody can kind of take 8 to 12 to 15 snaps off of his plate per game, and not only that, but this is it for him. This is it for Warren Brinson. And there is just nothing that you can do as a coach, as a program, to simulate the sense of urgency that comes with that last year playing ball. I love the Mykel Williams move to defensive end because it gets Ty Ingram Dawkins on the field. And I know Ty Ingram Dawkins has this reputation of, he can't stay healthy. I think we need to pump the brakes on that because it's been one injury. It's been the foot injury that began early last season and lingered on it, and he had surgery on it just like Smile Munden did to correct it during spring drills.
Did he not have one in 2021 though?
He did, but he missed one game. It was like one game.
Yeah.
And I want to say
he wasn't. Yeah, and he wasn't really much of a factor on that group anyway.
Yeah, he could have. I mean, he was. I mean, we're talking about
in 21.
Yeah, we're talking about 2022, not 21. He was a red shirt that year. But he did miss one game in 2022 whenever he was a factor in the 2022 defensive line, but was still healthy for the vast majority of the year. Now he's got that behind him. Man, I think a defensive front of whoever you want to put in there on the interior, because I consider Warren Brinson and Hall and Miller to be interchangeable. But whoever you put right there with Nazir Stackhouse, with Ty Ingram Dawkins or Gabe Harris, and with Michael Williams as that edge guy, I think you're really good against the run and you're more dynamic as far as pass rushing. Teams have had this thing against Georgia. Georgia's had an elite third down defense last year, an elite third down defense. But I feel like on first and second down, you could kind of hold the football a little bit because Georgia's going to play run first, but I think having Michael Williams there gives you a pass rush, element on first and second down that maybe you didn't have. Maybe Gabe Harris brings that same element as well. But I really like what Georgia brings back. And if you look at the guys that Jesse singled out, let's start at end or edge. And I'll throw Gabe Harris in this group too. And he didn't mention Joseph Jonah-Ajayi. So Joseph Jonah-Ajayi, Michael Williams, and Damon Wilson, 5 stars. All of them 5-star talents. Gabe Harris, high 4-star talent. Jordan Hall, 5-star talent. Christian Miller, high 4-star talent. Ty Ingram Dawkins had some 5-star love out there. I believe he ended up being a high 4-star. Warren Brisson, Nazir Stackhouse, just grown men that have played ball forever. There's so much talent there. I think this is going to be a much improved, much more dynamic Georgia defensive line this year.
So I'll throw this to you because I'm a little low on them. You're a little high on them. Which group do you feel better? I would guess I know the answer. Which group do you feel better about going into the season? Georgia's defensive front or Georgia's back end? Take the inside linebackers out.
Well, I feel much better about the defensive
just
front.
Those.
I feel much better about the defensive front.
See, I disagree. I disagree.
And the reason I feel that way is, man, I mean, Georgia lost 3 guys that gave you the ultimate highest floor and a very high ceiling as well. We're talking about 3 guys that were drafted, on day 2 of the NFL draft and played really great football for Georgia week in and week out. I'm worried about that safety position, not like super worried about it, but I'm really interested to see how Georgia fills it. And it's one of the reasons why I've said over and over and over again, I put KJ Bolden there and I just let it ride. I see how it goes. And I think Dan Jackson's a good player. And I think he's a guy that you keep there. You keep him and Ja'Cory Thomas warm for when KJ has some of his freshman struggles. I feel pretty good about Starr. I'm probably a little lower on corner than other people because replacing Kamari Lassiter is no small feat. It is no small feat. And when I was watching, I want to say it was either the Tennessee or the Ole Miss game the other day. I think it was the Ole Miss game. And they went at Kamari Lassiter about 3 times, not in the passing game, but they tried to get the run game out to him and the screen game, and it was nothing. I mean, he was having none of it. He was elite in that way. And I don't know that Georgia – I don't think Julian Humphrey – that's the knock on him. Daniel Harris, still kind of rail thin. You've got a true freshman in Ellis Robinson that'll be competing for that spot. Who's going to bring that consistency to that spot because it's very important. And so I just feel better about the line than I do the secondary.
See, to me, I think maybe it's a little bit of, stargazing and looking at the recruiting rankings too much. But I think that the talent is there on the back end more so than it is up front. I mean, just all across the board. At safety, you've got,
well, if you're stargazing,
to have 2 5 stars there.
If you're stargazing, you've got more 5 stars in the front than you do the back end.
Do you though? I mean,
you got 4. You got 4 5 stars.
4, and that would be,
or at least 3. At least 3. And I may be wrong on that. Maybe 4.
Michael, Joseph Jonah,
Jordan Hall, and Damon Wilson.
Yep. See, on the back end, you've got Malachi, you've got Ellis, you've got KJ.
That's it. 2 of them are true freshmen. If you're stargazing.
See, but Janelle had
he was a top 50 guy. Yeah, he was a top 50 guy, but then you've got other top 50 guys in there too. Dalen Everett, I believe, was also a top 50 guy.
Had a lot of. See, I think Dalen Everett might have been number 33 just
right
like
out of
the
it.
first
Yeah, I
out
think you
of
might be right.
5-star.
Yeah, I think you
Yeah,
might be
he
right.
was number 33, number 5.
But then you look at the D line, and I believe Ty Ingram Dawkins was a top 50 guy. It's pretty close. It's comparable. Well,
Yeah.
actually, it's
No,
107.
it is, and
That's wild.
yeah, I mean, so I
Man, you
mean,
want to talk?
Dalen Everett.
I know this is totally out of the conversation here, but you want to talk about somebody who had a wide array of. He was ranked 24/7 Sports had Ty Ingram Dawkins ranked number 20 in the country, and I want to say that was Charles Power, our guy Charles Power, who did that. And then 72 by On Three, I believe that was kind of in retrospect. 281 by ESPN, 231 by Rivals. And still, with all of those rankings, ranking from 20 overall to 281 overall, he was still the number one player in South Carolina. So that's pretty interesting. But I'm really high on him, and I think he's a guy that the more you can get him on the field, and the more you can get him lathered up. I mean, look, man, he came back for one game last year, like the first game back, and he just comes in and makes a strip sack against Florida that changes that game. That just puts Georgia in a spot. So no, they're definitely comparable if you're stargazing. I just think the defensive line probably has a little bit more experience coming back. And
Yeah, no, and that's where I will admit, like, hey, I think the defensive line, and I think this is probably a good comment from Jason Cancel here. Floor is higher for the front of the defense. Ceiling is probably higher on the back. I just think that the overall talent of that defensive backfield is probably a little bit higher than the talent up front. But you can't replace experience. You can't, that's the kind of thing that it's impossible to replicate.
I want to talk to my man Lucas Mays here. Who cares about stars? Listen, I totally agree that that's not really part of it. It's just a way to frame the discussion. I mean, if you want to know what we're hearing from the coaches and the scoop, then you got to be a member at DawgsHQ. That's kind of our little our agreement here.
Promo code UGA1,
and we'll
promo code UGA1 gets you $1.
But these are discussions we have with our members, our paying customers over at DawgsHQ. And listen, we appreciate everybody that's on the channel and listens to the podcast. With absolute certainty, we are definitely you're a big part of what we do and why we do what we do. But that scoopage and insider stuff is kind of reserved for our members over at DawgsHQ, and we talk about it all the time. I will say that we heard good things about the defensive linemen this spring. We heard good things about the secondary this spring. The thing about the secondary, though, is on one hand, nobody's really stood out yet in taking control of those jobs that are open. But on the other hand, there are so many guys, talented guys in competition for them that you feel the cream will rise to the top. And so it's almost like playing the law of averages in a qualitative assessment, which is kind of tough, but that's just kind of where we are on that. All right, Palmer. Listen, Diamond Dogs, 8 straight games, 8 straight wins, 7 straight in the SEC, firmly in the discussion to be a top 8 seed at this point, and that is evidenced by the fact that they have ranked. What is it? Anywhere from number 5 or number 6 to number 9. What's the
number
latest?
5? Perfect game had them at number 5. They were.
Kendall Rogers getting sky high on the Dogs.
Yeah, they were number 9 by D1 baseball. So anywhere between those two, coaches had them at 8, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then the
Baseball America
had them at 6.
Yeah, so 5, 6, 8, and 2, 9.
And then you look at RPI, and they're 2 or 3, kind of depends on what metric you're looking at. They are, like you said, firmly in the conversation for a super regional host. Jake, we were having some conversations over text that I did not anticipate to be having, talking about
right.
Hey, who's got to be there? The first weekend of June to be in Athens to cover baseball. Didn't anticipate us having those conversations.
I'll tell you this, man. You've obviously been boots on the ground with us all year long, so I feel like this is probably a better question for you than it was Rusty. But tell me if I'm wrong here. The most impressive thing about this team to me is, and I'm going to list off some things here: the sweep in his first SEC series as head coach at Kentucky, Wes Johnson's first, sweep at Kentucky.
Getting swept.
You got swept. You just let one slip away from you at Tennessee on Sunday of that series. Just let it completely get away from you, right? You blew it at Mississippi State on Sunday. Completely blew it. You blew it on Sunday, I believe it was, against Missouri with a chance to sweep the series. Maybe that was on Saturday. But you blew it.
I think it was on Saturday. Yeah.
Completely blew it against Missouri. You gave up a 9-run lead at Texas A&M in game 2. And at no point has this team even come close to folding after any. It's not just Palmer that they didn't. It's not that they didn't fold, but they didn't even struggle after those things happened. They came back out firing it. They came back and won the next game of the Texas A&M series after falling behind. Was it 4-0 or 3-0? They came back from the Kentucky series and swept Alabama. They bounced back from those games. I mean,
25 Alabama team at the time. Yeah.
I mean, it's just, the resilience of this team is astronomical. It's one of those, I bet if you're talking to Wes Johnson in 20 years, and he comes back to Athens and is just kind of hanging out. Let's say he's had a really good career.
Who says he's gone?
Right. But let's say, 20, 25 years from now, he comes back to Athens and he's talking about coming back to celebrate a College World Series team or something, an anniversary of one. I would bet that this first team at Georgia will rank up there with any that he's ever had as far as coaching them, because of the way this team has kind of made its way and gotten by. I honestly know this. I don't care if they win a College World Series or not. What has happened this year for Georgia baseball has been incredibly special.
Yeah, and they have changed the trajectory of the program from just being in a really, kind of a hole, just where they couldn't seem to get out of their own way. And look, the biggest issues with Georgia baseball have been in the postseason. Georgia baseball still has to play the postseason this year. So we don't know if they've gotten over the hump of getting out of a regional or whatnot, something that they haven't done since 2008. But this team, it feels like they are positioned better to go do that than even some of those teams that were top 8 seeds. And this team may be a top 8 seed. They may not be. I just really like the way that they play baseball, especially summer baseball. Bats are hot. It is warm out, and one pitch can cost you 3 runs. I think it's really, really hard to rely on your pitching. And so, those teams, they had incredible pitchers. Emerson Hancock's in the big leagues now. You've got Jonathan Cannon that's in the big leagues now. Cole Wilcox has been, an outstanding player. They had some really good baseball players. I'm drawing a blank on his name. A reliever that's in the big leagues now. Yeah, Zach Christopher. Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Has appeared in the big leagues. They had some really good players. A lot of it was pitching based. And so that is a hard recipe. I think if you can get to Omaha, pitching is important. There's no denying that. If you can get to Omaha where you're playing in a bigger park, your pitching may be the more important thing. But when you're playing at your home park, pitching, Foley being a smaller park, it's not a pitcher's park at all. It is very much a hitter's place. It is so hard to rely on that. And I think back to that Florida State, series, that they had in that 2019 regional, where it just felt like every pitch that the Seminoles hit was going out. And so, I think that this team is really very well positioned. I think that's a credit to Wes and the way that he saw Foley Field, built around Foley Field. He's talked about it several times that, Kentucky's got the biggest place, biggest park in the SEC, and they're built on speed. That's not an excuse for why Georgia went and got swept up there. But, that's a factor. Kentucky is built to its park. LSU is built to its park. Georgia is now built to its park. And I think that is a big reason why we're seeing some of the success. And I think it's a big reason why this team has potential to do really well in the postseason.
And also, I mean, I don't think we can gloss over the fact that Georgia's pitching has steadily, not rapidly, but steadily has improved. Harris is pitching at a really high level. I'm going to be missing on some first names here, but if they could get Jarvis going, that's another one. Get Goldstein back healthy. That's a big one. You've started seeing the guy that was accused of the pine tar thing,
Christian Maragna.
Yeah, Maragna has been a little bit of a weapon out of the bullpen. Zeldin.
Brian Zeldin.
Brian Zeldin has kind of picked things up out of the bullpen for him. He's gotten hit some, but again, I mean, it's just honestly, if you look back at the South Carolina series, Georgia may have fared pretty well in Omaha pitching the way they did because they gave up some bombs that kind of got to them. That may have been a really good series for them, but they got to play better defense, to get where they want to go.
That South Carolina series is the most impressive thing that they've done this season. To go on the road and to sweep like that, and at what is at least seems on TV to be a bigger park, that's the most impressive thing.
Well, another thing I'll say this too, Palmer. You made this comment to me about Omaha and how, hey, Georgia's not going to go hit a bunch of home runs in Omaha, and I agree. I mean, it's a bigger park. It's just the law of averages. When you look at Corey Collins, Charlie Condon, Slade Alford, and Trey Phelps. You look at some of the bombs that they've been hitting lately, and you're like, man, these are going out anywhere. Like these guys, maybe Gonzalez hit an absolute nuke in that series too. The one thing I think would help this Georgia team more than anything, though, is if Corey Collins could kind of jump back on the home run train. I felt like he went through a little bit of a slump there as far as hitting the ball out of the park during SEC play. Picked it up this past weekend with a couple of bombs. I tell you this, though, man, anytime you got two guys at the top of the lineup getting on base between 55 and 60% of the time, you got a chance to win a lot of ball games, and that's what Georgia's got.
They're a fun team to watch. That's for sure.
They are.
I mean, offensive baseball is really fun to watch. The pitching is coming around so that it's not, so that you're not pulling your hair out, watching them just walk guys left and right. Like you said, the defense has got to get a little bit better. Because when you're playing in those bigger parks, it definitely puts pressure on that. So Hoover is going to be that way. And look, Georgia doesn't need to have an outstanding week in Hoover. They can go one and done and still host a regional. Maybe not one and done.
Right. Yeah, they're hosting a regional no matter what, unless they get completely swept.
Unless they drop 4 straight. Yeah.
Yeah. But if they win, I think 2 out of 3 against Florida and a one and done would still give them a chance to be a top 8 seed. 2 and 3 get a couple wins.
The way I think I see it, I think 3 wins. You've got 4 games guaranteed: 3 against Florida, 1 in Hoover. I think 3 wins out of those 4 games, you're probably hosting a super. That's kind of where I'm at with this team. Is I think they need 3 to host a super and 1 to host a regional.
And that is always where you want to be. Always where you want to be. And I'll tell you this, man, some of my fondest memories as a student at Georgia and as a baseball fan, where when Georgia hosted regionals, super regionals, that Georgia Tech super regional, I think it was in 2000.
I think that was 08.
2008. Yeah. Right around, I believe so. That I remember Georgia Tech jumping out to like a 6 or a 7 run lead in the first, and you just never blinked. You were like, all right, Georgia's going to score, and you're not worried about it. And I believe Georgia came back and, put about maybe they fell behind like 4-0. They came back and put like 9 runs on the board at the bottom of the first, and it was just game, set, match from there. But
it was not 08. 08, they played NC State.
Okay. Maybe it was the year prior to that. They did have Georgia Tech in a super regional one year, and I watched game 3 of that one, and it was a lot of fun. But listen, it's summertime, and the Georgia baseball team is giving you something to watch and something to keep an eye on, and we'll have that covered for you over at DawgsHQ. Also, recruiting visits are really picking up. There's a massive visitor list over at DawgsHQ you need to come check out. We'll have that covered for you as well. But we've taken enough of your time. It's been a really long Georgia show, and we'll go ahead and get out of your hair. Y'all take it easy and have a great week.